I'm Chance Dorland, and this is the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from ExpressNews.com. And as always, I'm joined now by San Antonio Express News Spurs beat reporter Jabari Young. Jabari, it has been quite a long time. How you doing, man?
Hey, man, I'm doing fine. How are you? It has been a long time, man. The corporate side of things, it's good to be back here, Chance, and I'm glad that the Spurs fans hopefully still stuck with us as we are working through obviously a lot of change, especially at the Express News, and a lot of fallen comrades. But we're back here and still kicking, and so much to talk about, man.
Yeah, so you just said it. Let's get straight to it. Like we mentioned, it's great to be back. It must be great for Spurs fans after this last season to kind of be getting some new blood into the team. And there has been just so many things. So let's just break it down. Where have we been the last few weeks specifically? We'll talk about Kawhi and Tony Parker and all that stuff later on. But the last 2 weeks, how have things been going?
Regarding the team, everybody's just, I think they're in that, okay, free agency is kind of passed and now it's quiet. You'll see a couple of things happen here and there, and we'll talk about that later. But right now, everybody's on Kawhi watch. What's going to happen with Kawhi Leonard? Where is Kawhi Leonard? We saw Kawhi Leonard in Vegas. Where is he at now? Kawhi Leonard used the bathroom at McDonald's in Los Angeles. Does that mean he's a Laker? Where's Kawhi Leonard? How's Kawhi Leonard? Where's Kawhi Leonard? I mean, I think people, they have kids' birthdays and happy birthday, sweetie. Where's Kawhi Leonard? Like, everybody is on Kawhi Leonard watch. They want to know what he's doing, where he's at, where he's sleeping at, which bathroom he's using, which shooter he tied first, left or right. They're just worried about Kawhi Leonard. For a town that seems to, have turned on Kawhi Leonard, everybody's still worried about Kawhi Leonard, and that's fair. They want to know what's happening, but right now everything seems slow. And if I had to take a guess, I would say that, hey, maybe Kawhi Leonard ends up in training camp with the San Antonio Spurs as of right now, because everything just kind of cooled down. Everything's kind of just so slow. So we'll see how it goes in the next few weeks here. But I can't really see Kawhi Leonard right now being traded. I just think the Spurs' asking price is too high.
Wow, I did not expect that bombshell. So we'll talk about that here in a moment. But let's get to some other Spurs action. Of course, with the draft and everything else, there have been a lot of additions and subtractions to the team. Some people sticking around. So let's kind of break it down. Since we spoke a long time ago, what are those personnel changes that we've been hearing about?
Well, obviously the big one is Tony Parker. We'll talk about that in a minute, but the comings and goings, Tony Parker, Kyle Anderson, you lose two of those players who really helped you over the last 2 years reach a level of success. So, kudos to Kyle Anderson, for going out and restricted free agency. It's always tough because, restricted free agency, you are, you're asked to go out and get a deal and bring it back to a team. And if that happens, we'll decide whether or not we'll match it or not. And I think a lot of people going into free agency felt like Kyle Anderson was going to have to sign his qualifying offer, hit unrestricted free agency next season, and maybe it'll better his opportunity of getting a long-term deal at bigger money. But he went out, he found a deal. The Memphis Grizzlies obviously believed in him. They believe that they want to get back to that grit and grind style, and so they believe that Kyle Anderson was one of the guys to do that. Kudos to Kyle Anderson for going out and finding that contract. A lot of people have been hard on Kyle Anderson for the last few years. And, obviously they want to see some results sooner rather than later. But you can't knock what that young man has brought to the table last year. I mean, career highs across the board, started in place of Kawhi Leonard, and really helped out a lot. Kyle Anderson has really proved that he can, A, play in this league, and B, he kind of carved out a role for himself in this league. And so, it's sad to see, finally he got it. Finally, he understood where he's at. And before you know it, he gets that deal. He's out of here. Similar to Jonathan Simmons last year. You know what I mean? He spent the first 3 seasons, really developing, trying to get better. And now he's finally found a place in this league, and bam, he's out the door. So Kudos to those both those guys for finding deals. But, in this situation, Kyle Anderson, I think the Spurs are really going to miss him. I think they'll miss his, the fact that he can play multiple roles. He can play multiple positions and be effective. I know he didn't have a good playoff run, but if you look at the overall season and what Kyle Anderson provided this team, you're going to say, hey, you know what? He's going to be missed because he's a playmaker. He's a playmaker. He's a guy who can, really score the ball in versatile ways. Especially, now that he's kind of carved out that niche of getting inside and getting into the paint and know how to score there. And he's also a great passer. So the Memphis Grizzlies are getting a more complete player than what the Spurs have seen over the last few years. And obviously last year they saw more of it. But, that's huge. That's huge. That's a huge blow for them. Whether Marco Bellinelli is going to fill that role, it remains to be seen. But Davis Bertans, Derek White, Bryn Forbes, those guys are going to have more of an opportunity, especially if Manu Ginobili decides that he's going to call it quits, which I feel like that, he'll probably make his decision in the next few days because that's usually around this time. That's when Manu makes it. So maybe this week you'll hear something on the Manu Ginobili front.
And you've mentioned it a couple different times, so let's talk about it now. What are your thoughts on Tony Parker leaving the Spurs? I got to say, you did a nice video that I included in the Express Briefing one day. It's this morning news digest, 5 to 7 minutes. I do it every morning. You can check it out at expressnews.com/podcasts. I included your audio from that. I thought it was really well put together, and I love that you defended the guy.
Well, listen, we can give Tony Parker a lot of flack over, over what's transpiring with Kawhi Leonard or everything like that, or the comments that he made. And I think that's all nonsense. Tony Parker's comments were taken out of context. And, I just feel like, hey, right now that man's leaving. And that is such a shame because when you look back at it, you thought that maybe he was going to end his career here. That's what you thought. But I've said this over the last few weeks, if you had to pick one guy out of the big three who you could envision ending their career elsewhere, in my mind, it was always Tony Parker. You go back to the things that, happened back in the day when, there were rumors that he maybe wanted to play in New York because New York was a bigger market. And then when the Spurs were ready to get Jason Kidd, how he felt about that. He always felt like there was something that Tony always had to prove to this organization from the day that he got into the door. I always tell people, remember, Tony Parker got cut by Greg Popovich in a way. Because Greg Popovich saw him play when he went to work out, he wasn't impressed, and maybe that has something to do with Tony's long flight, but he was not impressed. He sent Tony and said, hey, get out of here. And Tony came back for a second workout, and this time he killed the workout. And then after, obviously, he gets handed the keys, a few months later to the organization. Well, the Spurs made a decision to hand DeJounte Murray the keys. And so maybe to Tony Parker, was that a slap in the face? Was that, hey, thank you for everything you did, but we're ready to take the keys from you and give it to somebody else the same way we did for you, 17 years ago. And I don't think that it was that personal. And if it was, I don't think Tony would ever reveal that. But in talking to people close to Tony, and I've spent a great deal of time over the course of the last week talking to them, I think that he felt it was time for a change. It was time for him to move on. And B, the amount of respect that he has for Michael Jordan, I think, is really underrated here and undervalued. I don't think a lot of people understand how much Tony Parker admired Michael Jordan coming up as a kid, with his dad in Chicago and then playing and then being overseas. Tony used to idolize him. And so now you get a chance to be around him for the next 2 years, a chance to learn from him. Remember, Tony Parker is heavily involved in the peak sneaker apparel. Maybe you want to, pick Jordan's brain on, hey, how did you develop the Jordan brand so I can take Peak to that next level? And also his great friend Nick Batum's down there, which played a part, and James Borrego, who I think has, pretty much said, hey, look, I got a role for you here. You know what I mean? It's similar to the one in San Antonio where I want you to play behind Kemba Walker, but I got a role for you here, a bigger role for you here. So, I think that might have been the case, but, the fact that he was willing to not be afraid to change after 17 years, the fact that he was willing to say, you know what, I did all I could here. You know what I mean? I helped you get those. I helped you get 4 of those championships. I was here. You know what I mean? I did it. Now it's time for me to move on, and it's time for me to go and maybe end my career on a different level, the way I want to. So I think Tony did it his way, and I think that can only be respected. He did not say, hey, I'm going to end my career the way Tim did, the way Manu Ginobili probably will in San Antonio. No, he's doing it his way, and his way says that he's ready for a new challenge at this point in his career, at this point in his life. And that's hard to find at his age. It is. It's really hard to find. I know people are going to be, it's going to seem weird, especially when he comes back. When you see Tony Parker in the number 9 uniform, it was weird watching a picture of him, raise the number 9 jersey that he had in the Charlotte Hornets jersey. And it was weird. So I know it's going to be weird seeing him actually in that jersey play. It's going to be weird as heck when he comes back to San Antonio and he's in the visitors' locker room. I don't know. A lot of guys always say, I don't know where the visitors' locker room is when they're on the other side. And I don't think he will remember. I can see Tony Parker coming into that arena and walking into the Spurs locker room as if he's just, as he's never left. So it's going to seem weird. But I think over the time, what you got to do is you got to salute the man. Six-time All-Star, NBA Finals MVP, has given you nothing but greatness for 17 years. And when that guy puts that much work in, when he puts that much time into a community, even if he decides to leave when it's all said and done, you just got to salute at the end of the day. And I think that's what everybody should do when it comes to Tony Parker.
So lots of people leaving, lots of people coming, but still, after all this time, we can't really put Kawhi Leonard in either camp. So let's start now talking about Kawhi for real. There was talk of LA. That doesn't look as likely, if at all, because of what's already happened with LA, the big news there. So what about the Raptors? There's so much stuff with Kawhi. There's possibility of going to another team. Also, now Kawhi eligible for the Supermax $221 million deal from the Spurs, but only the Spurs. Bring it to me, Jabari. Let's start talking about Leonard.
That Raptors rumor is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. I mean, if you're the Toronto Raptors, why the hell are you going to trade for Kawhi Leonard? I understand he's a great player. Okay, yes, he is. He's fantastic. But so is DeMar DeRozan. Okay, DeMar DeRozan ain't no slouch. He's an all-star just like Kawhi Leonard is. Okay, and has been an all-star for a long time. Has been an all-star longer than Kawhi Leonard has been an all-star. Okay, he ain't no slouch. All right, yes, he had a bad playoffs last season, but at the same time, listen, cut the man some slack. It's not like he was playing against chopped liver. He was going up against LeBron James. Okay. And everybody knows LeBron James has spooked the hell out of the Toronto Raptors for I don't know how long. So you're talking about a team that finished number 1 in the Eastern Conference. Okay. Legit. Dwayne Casey, they fired their head coach, was the coach of the year. He got fired and accepted that award while he was the head coach on another team now. Okay. And the Detroit Pistons. If you're Masai Ujiri, the GM of the Toronto Raptors, I understand the appeal about Kawhi Leonard. I understand the fact that you feel like, hey, we're a big city. We're up in Toronto. We got Drake here. Okay. I'm telling you, Kawhi, you come up here, we form you with Serge Ibaka, and we put Kyle Lowry, a good point guard around you. We feel like we can do some damage in the East. I don't understand why you're doing that, though, because Kawhi Leonard will probably not re-sign in Toronto. So you're giving up an all-star and DeMar DeRozan and whoever else you give up for Kawhi Leonard, and basically you're losing. Unless Masai Ujiri say, hey, I'm going to roll the dice. I'm going to go get Kawhi. I'm going to roll the dice on 1 year. If we don't make it to the NBA Finals with the team, with Kawhi on this team, then I'm breaking the whole thing up anyway. And if I'm breaking it up anyway, okay, I might as well try to hit a home run and swing for the fences. I'm giving this squad 1 more year. But if you're giving them 1 more year, you should give them 1 more year together. Again, number 1 in the Eastern Conference last year. Okay, everybody thought that they were poised to finally beat the Cleveland Cavaliers. That they were poised to finally get out of the East. Well, guess what? Maybe this time it's a little bit easier because there's no LeBron James standing in your way. And if LeBron James isn't standing in your way, I feel like the Raptors have just as good as the Boston Celtics and the Philadelphia 76ers to get out of the Eastern Conference. Okay, I really feel that way. But around the league, this deal just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. Okay, unless you're Toronto Raptors and you're trying to cut salary, but at the same time, it just doesn't make sense. So I'm not buying it, and I might have to eat crow with the Toronto makes that deal. I think they're going to surprise everybody. But right now, it's just unbelievable. Right now, that's just somebody maybe putting out some nonsense in Vegas, and all of a sudden they decide that they want to make some money on it, and they send everybody into a frenzy. I'm not buying it. I think it's foolish. I don't see how that favors the Toronto. I see how it favors the Spurs. You're getting back the DeMar DeRozan. You're getting back a prime guy in his prime. One of the best mid-range scorers in the NBA. Okay, I mean, the man could get 20 or 30 in his sleep in the mid-range. He can get in the lane. Okay, he can do what he wants. I love DeMar DeRozan's game. And if San Antonio happened to steal him away from Toronto, I mean, that they should be awarded the all time. That's a star for a star right there. And nobody thought that they were going to get a star for a star in this package with Kawhi Leonard. They thought they were going to get young assets and young players and assets, but not a star for a star. So if they happen to did that, then guess what? The Spurs can pick up where they left off. Okay, they're just as poised to compete in the Western Conference as anybody else, especially with Greg Popovich as a head coach. So you couldn't knock the Spurs for the deal. I would just knock Toronto because they're going to lose Kawhi Leonard. And if they do that, then you're starting over from everything. You're knocking down the whole team, getting rid of salary and just starting back from it all. And I think in the Eastern Conference with no LeBron James, I don't know how smart that is. So again, I can't see Toronto go. I mean, the Kawhi Leonard going to Toronto Raptors. And again, I really feel like he'll start the season in San Antonio. Unless something dramatic happens, unless people finally say, you know what, we're just going to roll it, I think he'll start the season in San Antonio. Now, what does that mean? I think there's a strategy behind that, too. If you start the season here, and let's say Kawhi Leonard goes for the first 2 months, and he looks phenomenal. He looks like the 2015-16 version of Kawhi Leonard. I think teams will be more inclined to give you what you want because they see the product. They're reminded of the greatness of Kawhi Leonard. So I think it's fair for everybody. And if not, then and remember something. You mentioned earlier in the podcast, he's now eligible for that $220+ million. Okay. If the Spurs offer him that, if you're Kawhi Leonard, they're going to call you a bluff and say, hey, we know you said you want to be traded, but take a look at that number there. Tell us you want to be traded. And now you have a decision to make. Now you publicly have to turn that down. And then I think if you do that, then the Spurs know that you're for real. So now you got to send a message. Hey, listen, it's not about the money. I still want to be traded. And if you are getting traded, the Spurs have to say, okay, give us a couple of months into the season and we'll try to make it happen. But show everybody what you can do. Show everybody that you still are the Kawhi Leonard who can go get 20 on the offensive end, 20 plus in the offensive end, and go stop whoever on the defensive end. You do that for the first 2 months, and I'm telling you, you're out of here. That's just my theory. That's how I feel it's going to go down. I just think he's going to start the season here. I really do.
So then moving along, we have the USA Basketball Camp in Las Vegas coming up. Is Kawhi going to be there for that?
From what I know, yes. And I feel like that's a smart move on his behalf. I think you got to show your face in public. I know initially there was some concern that if he wasn't traded by that point, that maybe he would not show up. But, that concern seems to have subsided. And from what I know, in talking to people behind the scenes, he is scheduled to be in Las Vegas next week when camp starts, along with Greg Popovich. So unless something changes this week or something dramatic happens, he's scheduled to be there. And if he's scheduled to be there, if he talks while he's there, get ready because you're going to finally hear from the man himself. As well as Greg Popovich talking about this. Remember, both parties have not talked about this since this has, been brought to the light. So now that Team USA is in the fold, he's probably going to speak more times than not. And I'm sure he's going to be asked to address that. And that's fair. On that platform, it seems weird, but, it is what it is. You got to attack the elephant in the room. And I think it's smart for Kawhi Leonard and Greg Popovich to both talk at this thing. You know why? Because if you do have to come into the season with him, knock it out the way now so that way it takes less off of media day and first day of training camp. Because you're going to be asked about it. Whether you be asked about it then or asked about it now, you knock it off now. You do what you got to do now. Talk about it now. Kill any rumor that you want to kill now before training camp starts. So that way you can get out of the way. And so that way, come training camp, you can say, hey, we talked about this months ago. We talked about this in July. We're not talking about it now. We're talking about the season now. Kawhi Leonard is here. We mentioned what we mentioned, and that's that. So that's going to be interesting come next week. So we'll see how it progresses.
From what you know, either from what you've been told or just, your own thoughts in your own head, I'm just wondering, why did Kawhi Leonard want to leave? We talked about this in length, in pretty much all of our previous episodes. You maintained a lot of the time that, they weren't going to trade him. He didn't want to be traded. You got, testy at times saying, people were getting down on Kawhi. Turns out Kawhi does apparently want to leave. What happened?
so much. And if people listen to this need to know what happened, they can go to expressnews.com and they can review all the past. I'm tired of talking about it, honestly. I really am. I'm tired of, a man says that he doesn't want to be anywhere anymore. Okay. I think now the world is waiting for him to come out and personally say that himself. And that's why if Kawhi Leonard talks next week, and that's going to be a big if, because I can also see Greg Popovich shutting it down and saying, no, but we'll see, if he does. Talk. And if he does, and I think he has to come out and say that himself. And I think one of the questions people and reporters are going to ask, and I think it's fair, is why. And we get to hear from himself. Chance, I can't wait until next week. I can't wait till we see Kawhi in public at that USA event, because that's going to reveal a lot, and now is the time. You got to talk about it now. I mean, you're on a public platform. You're in a league. We can go back and forth and go back into history and try to pinpoint what changed. But at the end of the day, a man has decided that he doesn't want to be in his, current situation anymore, and he wants out. And as that has to be respected. But now it's up to Kawhi Leonard to say that in public. And that's why I said, again, next week is, if he does talk, which I hope he does, it's going to reveal a lot. He has to come out now and he has to say what the world has been wanting to know. And everybody wants to know from his point of view. Not from mine, not from yours, not from the talking heads on sports channels, not from journalists on the ground. Why? I can tell you a million reasons why. I could tell you, but everybody's going to look at me and says, "Oh my God, he's taking up for Kawhi Leonard." No, that's not the case. I'm just telling you what I know. Okay. And now it's time for Kawhi Leonard to speak for himself, and he's going to have that opportunity next week. And I hope to God, once again, that he takes full advantage of it.
Mark it on your calendar. So that's a big thing possibly coming up here in a bit. And then finally, we've been talking more than just Kawhi Leonard, obviously, but, that is the big elephant in the room. Speaking, of the Spurs, though, in general, any more moves you think outside of possibly trading Kawhi Leonard later on, as you've been mentioning?
Yeah, right now things are slow. I can definitely see maybe a couple of free agent bodies coming in. The Spurs have always been known to bring that one vet or two vets into training camp. We'll see who those guys are. I've been told a guy like Gerald Henderson is trying to get back into, the league. And he's been hurt the last 2 years or so. So, I know that for a fact that he's trying to get back. Whether the Spurs will look at bringing another wing into training camp. A vet wing like that to make the roster it remains to be seen. So we'll see how that unfolds. It's one of those situations where, like I said, they have a lot of bodies coming in and they're going to bring guys in to compete for spots. So maybe a roster move here or there. Pau Gasol is supposed to be one of those guys mentioned in the trade rumors. Whether they can find a home for him, I doubt. But we'll see. I think the phones. I don't think the phones will be ringing off the hook for Pau Gasol. I think the Spurs will have to kind of initiate those to see whether or not they can kind of clear some room. But maybe another big man to bring in. But it'll be a vet. It'll be one of those a vet guy that can come in and kind of play. So they're in an interesting position. They really are. They bring back the majority of the roster with the addition of Marco Bellinelli and Lonnie Walker and Chimezie Metu, and we'll see how if he'll be on the roster. Remember last year they selected Jerron Blossom game and he ended up in the G League. So they right now it seems like they're full, but I can see a vet or two coming in and maybe trying to change things, or that young guy that maybe somebody gave up on that is looking to kind of get back into the league, a shooter. You know what I mean? So we'll see how it goes. But like right now, I don't think anything outside of the Kawhi or anything. I can't see anything big happening. And like I said, maybe a Pau Gasol conversation here or there that might get leaked. But right now, it seems as though that everything's quiet. Usually by the end of July and into August, minor deals get happen, small things get happen. Things restricted guys, maybe re-signing with their team, signing qualifying offers. But as far as with the Spurs, I really can't see anything happening right now, and everything's quiet with them right now. And I think that's the way that they like it, so they can get back to really trying to do their undercover business.
Yeah, I bet they're pretty happy that finally things are a little bit quiet. But as you mentioned, maybe the voice of Kawhi Leonard will be speaking here in a bit. So we'll be covering that as well. We're back. The Spurs Insider is back, Jabari. So great speaking with you today. Great catching up on everything that we've missed while we've been taking a break. And we'll have another episode next week. Take care, man.
Chance, thanks for having me, man. It is phenomenal to be back.
And a big thank you to San Antonio Express News Spurs beat reporter Jabari Young for joining me for today's episode of the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast brought to you by ExpressNews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, it's great to be back. I'm Chance Dorland.